Hey, what's happening, guys? Dan Dario here with another Options and Play video update. Earnings season finally back. This coming week, it will be basically the official kickoff. Mostly banks, kind of like a smattering of other names, a couple interesting industrials, transports, even like one pretty big tech name, but definitely mostly banks. All right, so uh, nothing scheduled. Well, there's really nothing of interest Monday before the open. After the close, nothing scheduled for Monday. Tuesday before the open is when things get going. So um, you have City. So before the open Monday, Tuesday, excuse me, you have City, which is priced in about 2.5. JP, which is pricing in about 4, and Wells Fargo, which is pricing in about $1.50. So I'll start with Wells Fargo. Definitely uh, laggard when it comes to the banks, major financials, and it's interesting basically for that reason. Also because it's kind of been in like a tighter 2 month range. You can see here, right? So I feel like it justifiably so has been lagging. I mean, it has more issues, but at the same time, they can show some positive momentum. This stock seems to have more upside potential, and especially if we can get through like 54.75 area, it could be really a nice pent up breakout, especially with the sector acting strong. So, bullish biased on Wells Fargo. Of Citi and JP, I say I'd focus more on JP because it's just been like the leader, um, one of like the best names in the banks out there, if not the best. Numbers have been consistently really solid. So it's priced in 4, um, but coming off a good quarter, and actually coming off a couple good quarters, and I feel like it's in a really strong trend, and you want to like probably probably look at some sort of strategy to maintain that trend. I'd say like 4 points. Probably not going to make too big of a move above that. So some sort of like strategy to get the risk down, but maybe um, more of like a continuation of like the really strong uptrend. That's what I'm thinking for that. But City's kind of like a similar setup too. All right, Delta also Tuesday before the open. So first big transport, priced in about 2.25. Airlines give monthly numbers, so kind of takes some of the volatility away from earnings. Chart looks solid though, right? It's kind of hanging out underneath the 60 level. You can see above it, really clear upside up into like the 63 area. Um, I guess the only question is like whether rising oil is going to hurt at all. But I guess overall that might be a story for a few months down the road. So probably lean bullish, but maybe not expecting a huge move just because those monthly RASM numbers kind of remove a lot of the uncertainty around earnings. After the close Tuesday, nothing interesting was before the open. More banks. So you have Bank of America, which you can see very similar to J.P. Morgan's, priced in about $1.10, and then Goldman. So this one they're looking for about 8.5. This one different setup because it's still well off its 2018 high, which you can see here. Um, and I feel like you could view it from maybe like more speculative, bullish standpoint, right? Because to say like maybe there's more room to catch up, which is true, but it's also up very sharp into earnings. Very sharp recent rally ahead of earnings. So expectations probably ratcheting higher. So it's a little bit tougher of a setup. It's interesting because of where it is and off its 2018 high, but it's also up very quickly into earnings, which can kind of make the earnings play a little bit tougher. But that's definitely what I'm going to watch, and I'll talk about Morgan Stanley in a minute. And I actually think that's a little bit better setup of the two, of these two, like Goldman and Morgan. All right. Um, UNH. So biggest healthcare name, all right, or biggest managed care name. Let me put it that way. Had We had a really nice trade on it back in October, and man, that thing has just been nonstop since then. It's at an all-time high. Just been powering higher. What's good about UNH is that it like Mr. Consistent in the sense that good or bad, it really tends to move when it reports. 10.25. Those aren't cheap, but at the same time, it did move about 20 last quarter. So it's had a huge run. Expectations are a lot higher. Um, 10.5 or 10.25 might be kind of tough on the upside. Um, on the downside, though, maybe you could see a little bit sharper of a move, just if a little bit of a hiccup, just based off the move it's had. So I guess you go with history. Say like it's moved more than the price to move a bunch over the last 2 years. So go with history on that one. But I just feel like the downside scenario might be a little bit more interesting than the upside scenario, even though the upside scenario might have a higher probability of actually playing out, right? All right. After the close Wednesday is Alcoa. I mean, like this used to be the kickoff to earnings, but lost its starting spot to the banks. And to be honest, it really hasn't been a play in a long time. So I'm not going to do anything with Alcoa. Thursday before the open, Charles Schwab. So $1.85 is what's priced in, and the huge merger announcement with TD Ameritrade in November, really massive surprise to people. And this stock and actually TD Ameritrade too have been mostly sideways since that. Um, and like the way I approach these earnings, the way I approach earnings on stocks that have like these merger deals going on, is that I kind of view them from like a lower volatility lens, just because I feel like the earnings are the secondary catalyst on this. Like anything revolving around the merger is primary. So I feel like volatility just tends to be lower in these situations. So laying out the money for earnings, just don't. I struggle to do that, so I'm probably going to avoid it. But definitely could be interesting, especially if they give some sort of update on that merger with TD Ameritrade. Um, like I said before, Morgan Stanley. So kind of a similar setup to Goldman in the sense that it's still well off its 2018 high, and you can see it is up over the last week, but not nearly as sharply as Goldman. So this one to me seems a little bit more interesting. $1.85 is what's priced in here. Again, not as extended, still has some catch up. So maybe if they can deliver a really solid number, it could be like a nice like kind of like pop and maybe like a continued extension from there. So definitely more speculative, but I do think that this one looks a little bit better than Goldman in that regard. Also Thursday before the open, Taiwan Semi. So big chip name. 240 or so is about what's priced in here. This is the biggest chip stock. Actually, yeah, I think it's biggest. Neck and neck with Intel. I think I may have overtaken it. But definitely the biggest tech report of the week. It really is going to set the tone for semis going into earnings. I mean, last quarter they had a really strong beat and raise. The stock didn't do a whole lot. It's right here. It didn't do a whole lot on earnings because it had a really huge run into earnings, and it's continued to have a really huge run after earnings. So, I mean, expectations are definitely very high on this, but it has been stuck underneath 60 for a month, right? It's kind of hit it 3 times and failed. So it's not as parabolic as it was last quarter, but it's also up a lot since last quarter too. So, I guess I wouldn't be expecting a whole lot of upside, but probably would look at this more from like a bullish perspective. Thursday after the close, CSX, so another transport, 315 or so. So what's priced in. Had a huge move in July on the surprise miss, and then more of like a muted move in October. Um, and you can see just like a very tight pennant forming right underneath that gap, right? Really clean pennant that's formed here. So I think this pattern's interesting, just because an increasingly tight pennant has a really clear gap above. The only problem is that the options seem a little bit expensive. So I do feel like there could be a pent up move here, but I feel like to be involved with this, you'd have to get risk some down somehow. So whether that's like spreads or flies or calendars, I mean, it just seems that the 315 seems to be more on the high side based off what this typically moves. But definitely one of the more interesting setups next week. Friday before the open, Schlumberger. So first big energy report, $1.75 is what they're looking for. The last major move, so the last big move Schlumberger in particular has had on earnings was back in January of last year, so just a year ago. And with energy starting to show life, with the stock starting to improve, maybe there could be a repeat performance this time around. The options, not cheap compared to what it typically moves, but I do think the setup it maybe warrants a volatility strategy just because it's kind of bumping up into this 40 area again. Has plenty of room higher. Had a big run off the December low, right? And maybe you could see like 2.5 to 3 points, maybe. So I'm thinking like maybe a volatility strategy on that one. And then last but not least, Fastenal. So 2.25 is what's priced in. So industrial report last quarter had a really big move, very outsized move for what Fastenal typically does. Probably the biggest move in like 10 years. I mean, it was a huge move, and I just don't think you can expect another move of that magnitude this time around. Um, I personally like to look at sympathy trades on this one because Granger GWW trades very closely, so it's closely correlated stock. You're not paying for earnings because Granger won't report to the following week. So I think like for me the way to approach Fastenal is with the sympathy trade on Granger. All right. So you can see we are going to get earnings, a little bit, kind of like a broad basket. I mean, not like a ton. Banks certainly very heavy, but outside of that, you get maybe like one off in each different sector. So, kind of getting into earnings, getting back into the swing of things. Got the J.P. Morgan conference. We got more retail sales, so should be a pretty busy week. All right. So if you like these videos and you are looking for more information on options education or more options trade ideas, follow up with the link in the description of the video for more information on options in play. All right. Have a fantastic weekend, and I will talk to you on Monday.